Noah returned to us like a chord that completes the song. We met at the edge of the Little Missouri River. The water moved with that quiet force rivers do when they don't need attention to prove they're in charge. Noah set down his pack and smiled in a way that fixed the last empty space in our circle. "Felt wrong to sit this one out," he said, and none of us pretended it hadn't felt that way too. The air was cool, the ground still damp from the week's rain, and somewhere under the soil was the next sentence of that spiral's long message. We stood shoulder to shoulder and let the river write its old sound into the day while our eyes adjusted to the vocabulary of the place: root, silt, glint, reed. We worked the river's shoulder politely, as the note had instructed us back at the diamond field. The corridor revealed by the two spirals, the seal, and the faint etch near the chain's clasp, ran on our map like a thin seam. We watched the water gather into narrow threads and listened for where they wanted to enter the bank. The Little Missouri had a way of talking in the margins. The reeds that bent together, the eddies that kept returning to the same shallow hollow, the soft give in the clay that wasn't there 2 steps earlier. Noah mapped with his hands more than his eyes, scrubbing little arcs in the silt, coaxing a small trench open to see where the flow would rest. Leo tested the crust for that stubborn, heavy feeling we'd learned to trust. Clara lifted frames that looked ordinary at first glance and secretive when you blinked. Photographer's magic, turning patience into proof. By midday, the light turned to butter and the river glossed into a silver run. A cluster of flat stones sat in an arrangement that looked more deliberate than weather should allow. Leo knelt, brushed the topmost stone, and found a shallow groove cut into its face. A single, patient curve. We cleared carefully, stone to stone, until a half spiral presented itself, the same old gesture in a new dialect. Noah traced it with a finger and hummed a note under his breath, and for an instant, the ripple at the river's lip feathered outward, as if sound could be a key. "If there's a message," he said softly, "it's damp but awake." We worked the perimeter until the final stone lifted to reveal a dark circle of compacted silt. Alex put the palms of his hands to the earth, then the 4 of us did together like a small borrowed ritual, and the circle gave a tiny sigh. Beneath, a tin cylinder waited, sealed with wax along its lid seam and pressed with our familiar spiral. We moved to higher ground and let the cylinder weep river water from its seam. The wax was old but loyal. It gave only after we warmed it between our hands. Inside, neatly rolled oiled paper exhaled a smell of old cedar and something lemony that had fought the river for years and won. A sketched map of the river bend matched the stones we had cleared. On the backside, a column of tight notes. When the river carries the hardest rain, the field speaks. When the field speaks, the notes align. Seek the ledger where the county remembers itself. The keeper is gone. The ink remains. A second object waited under the roll, a small brass triangle etched with a tiny notch on one side. The notch matched the mismatch corridor we'd once seen between the 2 spirals. "Ledger," Clara said, already scanning options. "County records, courthouse or historical society." Leo folded the map with reverence. Noah packed the cylinder in a dry bag, and the river put its voice back where it had been before we interrupted. Murfreesboro's courthouse had that light, softened dignity of buildings that outlast their timelines. We passed a glass case of old photos, floods and baseball teams and the kind of fairs that turn into somebody's best day, and asked a clerk about ledgers. She sent us down a quiet hall that smelled like paper and wooden drawers. The records room was simple and honest: shelves, dust, penciled tabs, a single window that preferred to be clean, but made peace with being old. A volunteer with a patient smile asked what we were looking for, and we answered with the confidence of people who don't know yet that their answer is big. Early land and flood entries near the Little Missouri Bend, and anything on early caches or community chests. To our surprise, she didn't blink. "Folks have looked for years," she said kindly. "You may find truth, but it won't be loud." She placed 3 ledgers on the table like small doors. Treat them like you would a letter from someone you miss. Ledger pages turned with that soft sound that lives between a whisper and a breeze. Most entries were practical. Dates, parcels, names that could still be in someone's mailbox. A thin column marked conditions, trailed notes like "field stood," bank scoured, cash rumor. That last phrase appeared 4 times across 2 years, each with a tiny spiral doodled by a different hand. Noah copied coordinates. Clara photographed marginalia. The 4th entry mentioned a child's whistle, a bird token, as if referencing a list, and the old chest charter kept downtown, and then an initial we couldn't match to a person. Leo tapped the brass triangle against the page and said, "This is a key to a key." The volunteer noticed our focus. "If you want the charter," she said, "the Historical Society keeps it in the basement vault. The air down there is good for papers and for thinking." The vault felt like a cool pocket under the day. The charter, more manifesto than ledger, described a tradition we hadn't expected. A circle of families who would hide small keepsakes near water after the hardest rains, not for value, but to teach patience, courage, and kindness to those who came after. The spiral, according to a margin note, symbolized attention carried forward. A small diagram mapped a sequence: field, river, town, field again, as if the earth had a heartbeat with 4 chambers. Near the back, a pasted rectangle of parchment showed an outline of a wooden chest and the list of first contents: a tin whistle, a bird token, a little envelope of stones, and a chain to carry. We stared at each other the way people do when the room turns familiar without changing a single thing. At the bottom of the charter page, a faint imprint of the spiral pressed through. Noah held the brass triangle over the drawing. It clicked into a shallow guide mark there, then rotated a quarter turn and settled. "Not a key," he said after a beat. "A pointer." When he aligned the notch with the triangle's pivot and the spiral's final curve, the pointer aimed not at the river bend, but up a road toward a line that read simply, "The place where carts pause." The town's oldest map on the opposite wall translated that into a real place, the old ferry approach where wagons would wait for the river to settle. Clara compared the angles the way she does, chasing geometry until it raises its hand. "The corridor between spirals wasn't just direction," she said. "It was timing and angle." We thanked the volunteer and left the vault with a feeling that a polite hand had just pressed our backs forward. The ferry approach had one of those spaces that looks empty and is not. A flat, stubborn plateau of packed earth met a slope of brush and river stones. Along the edge sat the skeleton of a broken dock ramp, still honest in its angles. Noah and Leo worked the line where packed earth met the ramp's shadow. Clara and I followed the mild trench of old cart ruts, now softened into green. It didn't take long to find the mark we didn't know we were looking for. A faint spiral scratched into the ramp's side beam, small as a thumbnail. We cleared calmly, as if the wooden bones were shy. Behind a loose plank, wedged where a careful hand had once tested and chosen, a short tube of dark glass rested, sealed with wax. Inside lay a strip of vellum and 3 pressed leaves that had kept their skeletons through seasons. The strip held a recipe of sorts. "When the cart road dries in stripes, follow the 4th. Where the 4th crosses Old Sparkstone, step back 1 and mark the clay. If the whistle speaks true, the water will not answer, but the ground will." "Sparkstone?" I asked. Clara looked up with that win you a trivia night face. "Novaculite," she said. "Sharpening stone. Native beds in Arkansas, used for ages. Sparkstone is a friendly old name. We returned at first light after a dry night and watched the cart road bake into pale and darker stripes, the way packed earth does when it keeps secrets under its skin. The 4th stripe showed a jagged interruption where gravel peered up through its mask. Novaculite, just enough to nudge the story forward. We stepped 1 back, marked the clay, and listened. The tin whistle from the first chest felt like props at first, charming, sentimental. But the note it gave here was different, more centered, as if the day had found its pitch. Noah held the tone. The ground did not vibrate in any grand way. It barely breathed, and then it answered with a sound the size of a dot. Leo grinned sideways at the spot. We lifted a square of clay like a lid. Underneath sat a small box of cedar, barely larger than a book. Inside, a folded paper, a thin sliver of mirror, and a round of brass like a coin with no numbers, just a spiral etched deep, the final turn ending in a clean notch. The paper carried another of those letters, careful and practical in equal measure. If you reached this, you were polite to the road and the river. The chest you seek does not sleep by water. It rests where the city's stone meets its heat, and the words people leave on tiled walls turn into weather. Bring the mirror, bring the whistle, bring the bird, and carry what you found. The spiral is not a place. It is a way to carry attention across places. Leo tapped the brass round and looked at us. City's stone meets its heat, he said. Sounds like hot springs. Clara's eyebrows agreed. The tiled walls line up with it too, she added. Bathhouses, old tiles with names and notes. Noah turned the mirror in his hand until it caught sun and river, and for a beat the spiral on the brass glowed as if it remembered things we hadn't seen yet. We gave the river our thanks and started for hot springs, while afternoon folded toward evening. The road unwound through trees into that particular geometry of a town that's grown around warmth. Bathhouses in sequence, old facades with quiet pride, tiled hallways that remember voices. That seems to be a good way to move through old buildings. In the tiled corridor of an older bathhouse, pale green and white with a skylight that liked to pretend it was summer, we found a line of tiles that didn't sit quite flush. The mirror caught their edges and doubled them, revealing a faint spiral when seen at the right angle. The brass round aligned with that spiral. The notch pointed toward a service door that had no business being beautiful, and yet was. We stood quiet, breathing with the room. On the other side of the door, a short stair led down to a utility run with clean pipes and honest dust. The far wall carried a relief pattern of old tiles, replaced but not perfectly matched, and at the center of that wall, a tile with a tiny bird in profile. Leo took out the token bird from our first box. The bird in his palm faced the tile bird exactly. The whistle's soft note held the air. The tile moved forward by a finger's width. We pressed the pattern in sequence: spiral, bird, notch. The panel swung on a hidden hinge. The chamber beyond was not a tomb or a treasure cave. It was closer to a small classroom without desks. Stone walls glowed lightly from some reservoir of heat in the earth. The floor was clean, the air steady. On a waist-high shelf rested a cedar chest larger than the one by the ferry road, fitted with brass corners and an unassuming latch. We looked at each other and let the moment say all the things that words flatten. Then we opened the latch and lifted the lid together. Inside, the top tray held envelopes and folded sheets, each tied with thin ribbon, letters from people with handwriting that made you breathe more carefully. Beneath the tray, wrapped in soft cloth, lay small objects, familiar and not. Another tin whistle with a finer mouth, a different brass token etched with a spiral inside a compass rose, a bundle of thin paper cut into circles of various sizes, and a small vial labeled simply Rain, Joy. At the very bottom, in a padded corner, a cluster of stones rested together. Tiny diamonds like a small constellation, not valuable in the way markets train you to think, valuable in the way stories make you taller inside. We did not plunder. We listened. There were instructions, gentle, funny in places, honest in all. You will want to rush, don't, one letter said. If you've reached this, you know the spiral is an attention you carry, not a place you find. The chest speaks only to clean hands and steady breath. Leave it better than you found it. Another letter invited a game. Arrange the paper circles by size on a blank wall, smallest to largest, and shine the mirror's light through them. When the warm air moves, you will see a path in the distortions. That path draws a focused spiral. Its notch will point. Clara photographed everything with permission from the building's caretaker, who had joined us quietly at the threshold and stayed, intrigued as you are when a story proves itself without raising its voice. We arranged the circles along the clean back wall and angled the mirror to catch sunlight from the skylight, then to catch the warm breath from the room's far vent. The light shimmered through the circles like a patient instrument. On the wall, the shimmering spiral did not complete. It narrowed, then jumped across a small gap, our familiar corridor of no overlap. The notch pointed to a small brass plate near the floor, nearly hidden under a maintenance sign. We closed the chamber exactly as we had found it, left a thank you note for the caretaker, and walked into the night with that calm clarity that follows a true find. Whatever the next place was, it would speak in a new voice, less earth, more hum. We decided to rest and start at first light. The spiral, it seemed, liked early mornings. We unfolded the fabric. Build. City hum took us east at dawn, following a map of intuition more than roads. Tracks are quiet but wheels remember, Noah repeated. Abandoned rail? Leo guessed. Or a retired streetcar, Clara added. The clue's leftmost pillar sounded like a terminus where architecture still holds the memory of movement. We spread the old county maps next to newer ones and drew lines like the circles had taught us. The spiral on the brass token sat in the center of it all, not a compass point, but a way to think about connecting points. We looked for where stone met hum, a grand station in a small city, or a small station in a grand space. In the end, the place found us. An old streetcar shelter of carved stone, pillars in a neat row, the tracks long gone but the platform patient in its waiting. We counted 12 steps from the leftmost pillar and pressed our ears to the stone floor like kids who still trust old tricks. The sound under there wasn't a train. It was a gentle mechanical breathing, a clock somewhere behind a wall, a room-safe rhythm that said maintenance rather than mystery. And precisely because of that, it felt true. The maintenance door near the platform's end had a lock that meant business, and we weren't about to disrespect it. Instead, we followed the corridor clue's temperament. Observe, align, ask. A city worker appeared with a coffee and a curious squint. We explained our search not as a claim to hidden riches, but as a wish to complete a historical puzzle. She took a careful look at our letters and our faces, then said, "If what you're chasing is decency left like breadcrumbs, I've got 5 minutes, no promises." Inside the small access room, the air was cool and honest, like the courthouse vault. 2 brass plates sat high on the wall, the kind of old hardware that outlives the instructions. One plate was etched with a bird profile, the other with a spiral so faint that the brass had almost swallowed it. The worker watched our eyes catch that and laughed softly. You'd be surprised how many people never look up. She left us alone with a key promise. If it's dangerous, we stop. If it's kind, we listen. Noah raised the tin whistle and let a single note hang like a slow-motion coin toss. The room's breathing seemed to lean closer. Leo pressed the spiral plate. Clara touched the bird. The plate slid a finger's width inward. The floor under our feet gave a tiny click, like a latch considering and agreeing. A narrow drawer eased from the wall at waist height, holding a book no larger than a paperback, bound in waxed cloth. The title on its spine wasn't a title. Ledger of Escort. Inside, page after page of names and notes, each dated, each in a different hand. Escort, Clara read aloud, as in escorting attention from one place to the next. The entries had a pattern we knew by now. Field, water, town, city, then back to field. Spiral carried forward. Some entries were a single line. Carried attention from cart ruts to tiled hall and returned empty as instructed, and some were paragraphs that read like short prayers to patience. Near the back, our year appeared in neat letters. The entry had no names, only a shape pressed in a seal, a spiral with the tiny corridor gap we had found by overlaying the 2 spirals earlier. Beneath, a simple instruction. If you carry the chain and the bird and you have let the whistle speak where it wanted, you may take 1 thing and leave 2, a remembrance and a direction. We replaced the book gently and looked at each other with the kind of smile that's also a bow. We left a letter of our own, signed with nothing but a small drawing of the corridor gap, and stepped back into the morning as if we'd borrowed it for a while and were returning it. Outside, city sound warmed up its instruments. Footsteps, deliveries, the rising conversation of a day. We followed the spiral logic back to the nearest green edge on the map, a park that had once been a common field before the city grew around it. The clue from the station desk, leave 2, take 1, felt like a test in generosity, not compliance. We laid the token bird on a flat bench of stone, took its photograph with a note of context, and placed the thin mirror under it, wrapped in soft cloth. We took from our pack 1 small envelope, a copy of the charter page about patience, translated to plain words so a stranger could feel brave enough to follow it. The park field had kept one old habit. After rain, it gathered small pools, then lines, then a slow, shy flow like a memory finding its way back. We watched for the corridor sign, where lines don't quite meet, where a pause reveals a path. That's when we noticed the sculpted drinking fountain at the park's edge, old stone, repaired often, at rest. Its basin was dry that morning. Around its base, tiles arranged in a spiral pattern with a tiny notch that was hard to see unless you were looking for it and already believed in it. 12 paces from the leftmost pillar, a clock that breathes, back to a spiral tile. The line had looped with a courtesy that left no one behind. Leo removed a single tile from the base, loose already, like a button waiting to be sewn. Beneath it, a pocket of dark air and a canvas pouch tied with a twine bow that had once been crisp. We opened the pouch on a bench with the simple reverence that keeps places kind. Inside, 3 things we recognized, and 1 we didn't. A child's tin whistle twin, with a reed tuned slightly lower than ours. A tiny vial labeled River Patience, which was only water, of course, but it felt like a note in a glass. A round of brass cut clean, with the spiral corridor etched deeper than the others we'd seen. And the new thing, a miniature compass with no letters, just a single line inside the face. At the end of that line, a notch. The line swung as any compass line would, except it did not seek north. It settled when we held it the way we held the chain, the way we held the paper circles, the way we had carried the attention forward. It settled toward a direction we could not find on any map, until we remembered to breathe. We followed the compass not by pointing, but by feeling the rightness when it rested. City blocks turned from stone to neighborhood to edge. The day warmed. A light breeze crossed face and forearm and kept the morning honest. The line pointed toward an old brickworks at the edge of town, now a quiet museum space and community garden. The caretaker, a man with the kind voice of someone who believes in long projects, asked if we needed directions. We said we were seeking a spiral mile marker that had been mentioned in a ledger. He thought a moment and then nodded. "There's a kiln with a floor that never sits level," he said. "It breathes when the weather changes. People say it hums. I say it remembers." The kiln was a round hall of warm shadow and science. The floor did not sit level. It leaned barely, and when the breeze moved right, the space made a sound like a held note finding its pitch. We placed the spiral brass on the floor's central ring and laid the compass by it. The line inside the compass face drifted, then found its rest. The spiral's notch pointed toward a brick in the wall, a brick with a bird profile scored lightly into its face. We pressed that brick, and the floor breathed out a soft thermal sigh. A thin panel slid open in the base, revealing a narrow drawer. Inside, another letter, another map that wasn't a map, and a delicate chain no heavier than a thought. The letter read, "When city heat meets city stone and hum becomes breath, go back to the field that is not a field, the place where the ground remembers fire. Stand where the seam of old earth meets the softened line of pasture, and let the whistle choose. If you have kept the spiral's manners, the earth will open its small door." We knew where it meant, though we all liked saying the words anyway. The old volcanic field, Leo grinned, where the soil holds a memory. We thanked the caretaker and left a donation with a note that simply said, "For the next patient person." The drive back held that odd quiet of an adventure that breathes mid-chapter, where you have to hold your excitement politely, or it runs too far ahead and gets tired before you need it. We arrived at the field by late afternoon, where the ground still wore last week's rain smell under the sun's touch. We chose the seam the letter described, the change from the deeper dark soil to the softened pasture edge, and we stood with the chain and the whistle and the mirror and the bird token's photograph like 4 threads braided into one. Noah raised the whistle and let it speak, not shrill, not loud, just clear enough to make the edge of the day listen. The sound folded against the ground and rolled back across our shoes like a tide an inch tall. I stepped where the tide paused. The soil offered a little give. Leo brushed the surface and pressed with the heel of his hand. A square just large enough to carry with 2 hands acknowledged itself. We lifted like people who have learned to share the work. The small door opened. The chamber below was no deeper than a tall person's chest, lined with hand-pressed brick, dry and exact. At its center rested a cedar chest with brass corners, almost a twin to the one in the warm, tiled room, but stamped with a different seal. A spiral at rest, complete, with no corridor gap. My breath caught, not with fear, not even with excitement, but with recognition, like shaking hands with a future memory. We opened the chest. Inside, on top, lay a folded piece of linen with a stitched spiral so fine that the thread looked like light. Beneath it, a narrow box held a set of paper circles much thinner than the last ones, and a flat glass disc. The letter on the linen said simply, "The corridor is not a flaw, it is an invitation. Where two spirals do not align, the path forms for those willing to look slant." Another fold revealed a small bundle tied with red thread. Inside the bundle lay a tiny cluster of diamonds, little suns, fastened together in a ribbon of fine metal. Next to it, a brass plate engraved with words that I suspect were meant for anyone who would ever reach this moment. Not wealth, wait. Carry this forward and leave the field lighter than you found it. We arranged the thin circles and the glass disc on the underside of the chest lid as the diagram suggested, and we let late sunlight enter through the cut we'd made in the ground. Light passed through the glass and the circles, and for a moment the inside of the chest became a small planetarium of spirals and lines. The image focused against the brick wall and drew a map that wasn't a map. A curled line with tick marks and symbols at 3 points we recognized: river, tile, kiln, and a fourth point, unvisited, marked with a tiny square and a notation: the hall that speaks without voice. Clara frowned with a smile. An anechoic chamber, she said. A room designed to swallow sound. A hall that speaks by refusing to echo. Leo nodded. City again, he said. Or university, or a testing lab. Noah watched the light pull the spiral just a finger width off perfect. Or a sanctuary that chooses quiet on purpose, he said. We replaced everything exactly as we had found it, except for the one thing the ledger had promised we could carry. We took the brass corridor plate as our remembrance, leaving in exchange 2 objects of our own, our spare mirror and a letter explaining the corridor insight in plain words for the next careful person. We closed the chest, lowered it back into its small room, settled the door of earth over it, and brushed the seam neat. The ground wore our gratitude like a small, friendly weight. Evening reached out and took the field by its edges. We sat at the tailgate in that soft gold that makes everything honest. 4 chambers, I said, thinking of the charter's heartbeat: field, water, town, city. And a 5th, Clara added, tapping the new mark on the light map. Quiet. Leo turned the brass corridor plate in his hand and watched the light graze it. Not a place, he said. A way to carry attention. Noah smiled. And a rule to carry it kindly. We watched the last line of sun settle itself in the field's shallow runnels, then stood, stretched, and began to put the day away. We reached town late and found a small library still open, the kind with a staff who recognize the look on your face that means your puzzle is well underway. The librarian listened to our hall that speaks without voice description and said, "There's a testing chamber at the technical college, no echoes. There's also a sculpture gallery downtown with a quiet room designed to calm the nervous system. And there's an old concert hall rumored to have a whispering corner. 3 doors. Choose one." We looked down at the brass plate, at the notch that had served us so faithfully. It did not move. It did not need to. We had learned to follow the places where 2 spirals do not align. "We start with the chamber," Noah said. "If it swallows the whistle, we'll know we're on the line." The chamber was unglamorous and perfect, a room lined with wedges that turned sound into something that was no longer there. A technician with a neat beard and an amused patience asked what we were testing. "History," Clara said. He nodded like that was as good a reason as any. Inside, the whistle's note vanished into the walls as quickly as it left our breath. It felt like playing a note into a pocket. In that instant, each of us felt it without needing to announce it. The corridor again, the place where the spiral didn't close, opening a path just wide enough for a person to walk through with their attention intact. The technician watched the way people watch weather. "Whatever you're listening for," he said kindly, "this is a good room to hear it in." We left with a direction not measured in degrees but in permission. The sculpture gallery's quiet room gave us the second tick on our way. The concert hall's whispering corner, less a true whispering gallery than an architectural accident, gave us the third. We left a copy of our letter there, too, in a weatherproof sleeve, tucked by a bench where the lane widened so two people could share a seat without deciding who owned it. The brass plate rode in Noah's pocket. The chain lay around Clara's wrist. The whistle rested in Leo's pack. The small envelope of the first stones and the tiny cluster from the last chest stayed with me in a pouch that made no sound when I moved. We did not pretend we'd reached the end. The letters had warned us against that kind of tidy thinking. The spiral was not a clue you solve and shelve. It was a way to hold attention longer than a minute. We decided on one more kindness before the day closed. We walked to the river and sat. The little Missouri didn't know it was a character in our story. It went on being the river, patient and clean where it could be, stubborn where it had to be. We each put a palm on the ground and said quiet thank yous, not because we thought the earth needed to hear them, but because we needed to say them. On the walk back, we passed a shop window with a tray of old keys and tokens. In the glass, our reflections overlapped like a homemade diagram: chain on wrist, brass in pocket, camera strap on shoulder, whistle tucked safe. The corridor between our shapes was there too, a narrow channel of streetlight where we didn't quite align. We laughed softly at ourselves and kept walking. The next mark would appear when we were polite enough to see it. I wrote by the soft light of a lamp while my friends rested, and in the space between the lines I left a corridor on purpose. Not a mistake. An invitation. We stood in the doorway with our small chorus of tools and stories, and we stepped out together, carrying attention forward the way the spiral asked us to, ready to listen for whatever the earth and the city and the quiet were kind enough to say next.